for a treat today. And first of all, can I just thank Farah for taking an hour out of your busy schedule to join us today, because that is a real honour for us. So I am going to read this biography because I think it's absolutely right that we do justice to how privileged we are to have you with us today. Our speaker today is Professor and Consultant Surgeon Farah Bhatti. Surgery is a very male-dominated field, and women from a minority background is even rarer in this field. And Farah is a Consultant Cardiothoracic Surgeon, I probably pronounced that wrong, at Morriston Hospital, and is the first woman of Pakistani heritage to be appointed as a cardiac surgeon and the only Muslim woman to be elected to the Royal College of Surgeons College Council. She's also the first female consultant cardiac surgeon in Wales and was awarded the OBE in the New Year's Honours List of 2021 for her services to diversity in the NHS in Wales. And there's lots of many other things that she's done to advance diversity in surgery. But before I have a conversation with you, Farah, I want to thank you for taking your time out again, simply because I think, you know, for somebody who's, we're talking about concrete ceilings, not even glass ceilings, you have really smashed that concrete ceiling. So I'm really grateful for what you stand for, what you represent, and what you've achieved, and being that role model for us all. And I am gonna ask you a question about how you choose to challenge, but I want that to come right at the end, really. And I'm gonna go to my I think I've got some questions in the inbox to look at what people are wanting to ask. But what was it, first of all, what was it that inspired you to do what you do?
First of all, can I say thank you, Naz and colleagues, for both the kind introduction and the invitation to speak. You've made me sound far better than I actually am. I'm just a normal girl from South London, as far as I can recall. So inspiration, along the way, many inspirations, but I guess I had always wanted to be a doctor, and not because my parents wanted me to be one, but as far back as I can remember in my sort of living memory, I wanted to be a doctor. And at some point during my teenage years, I became sort of interested in the heart. And it was in my clinical years, so I did my pre-clinical in Somerville and Oxford, and it was very separate. You didn't go into the hospital setting. And it was when I walked into a general surgical theatre in Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge, I sort of had this sort of eureka moment. It's like, yeah, this feels right. This feels like home. So logically or illogically, or probably quite naively, I thought, right, I like the heart. I think I'm going to be a surgeon. I'll be a cardiac surgeon. Simple as that. And that was it.
You know, like we do, because when I was a young girl, right, I lost siblings, and I remember my mum saying there was a heart problem. And I remember there was a famous doctor, I think it was it Bernardo's, who was a famous heart surgeon back in, and I remember growing up thinking, I'm going to fix people's hearts, right? It just didn't transpire, and I don't think I'd have made it to where you've made in any case. But you know, because you have to apply yourself.
To fix people's hearts or affect their hearts in more ways than just being a cardiac surgeon, Naz.
But it was really, you know, it was one of those things, which is, you know, and I'm glad you've said it wasn't because you were pushed into it, but you made your own decisions, because often it's like, especially if you're of Pakistani heritage, well, your mum and dad expect you to be an accountant, a lawyer, or a doctor, and that's what the standard was. What kind of barriers did you face, Farah, when you went into this male-dominated field?
The good news was there wasn't any internet when I began my training, or social media or devices. So I didn't really know that there weren't very many women doing it. And if I look back, you're talking about parental pressures. My parents were really quite cool and probably sort of quite forward thinking. They believed in education, but they weren't really sort of pushing us one way or another. You've asked me about sort of barriers. I think I can't lie and say I've never experienced any sexism. Usually subtle. Usually now we have words for it, don't we? We have the microaggressions or the undermining, but it's not new. It's been there. Dare I say mansplaining? But I don't feel personally that I've suffered anything due to my sort of background in terms of my heritage. So usually subtle things, small things, never getting the tap on the shoulder for that particular job or hearing about it, never being quite invited or in the right place, always just missing out, but kept going. So it's the little things that, you know, you sort of think that can add up, and that's why I feel so strongly. You mentioned about being role models yourselves, you know, I mean, all of the MPs and the colleagues in the room. So I think it's so important to show other people that you can do it, and you should do it if you want to.
Something, you know, when you talk about that tap on the shoulder, that you didn't get the tap on the shoulder. So it's about, so women often have to create that tap on the shoulder. So what did you do to make sure you got that tap on the shoulder, to put you in the right places at the right time to get to where you needed to get to?
Well, I guess I had a sort of, I would say you need a plan A and then plan B and plan C. I was probably quite sort of single-minded about this. These are the jobs, these are the prestigious jobs. You had to sort of move around a lot in the days I trained. This is the exam you need to pass. So almost never get, and I was pretty comfortable about moving anywhere in the country to get the job that I wanted to get it on the CV, to do the next thing. So I was probably single-minded, didn't always get the things that you wanted to, but I kept going. You know, it wasn't all rosy and it's all fantastic and you go sort of in a straight line up. It's lots of little, you know, sort of bumps along the way. So I guess I kept going. So somebody has already mentioned determination. And then when things aren't going your way, you look at your support systems, because it's not a solo thing. You've got to have your support systems and sort of, so I don't think I ever got the tap on the shoulder. Not that I have a chip on my shoulder about it, but it's just, you keep going and you make your opportunities, and yeah.
So when you create your opportunities, what is it that motivated you, or what does it drive you, or who are your role models? Where did you get your inspiration from? Because it's not just as simple as, well, you make it sound really, really simple. Like I was really, really single-minded and I needed to get to where I got to. But then you talk about support networks, and that's important. But what was it that inspired you to be so single-minded? What were the qualities needed in, you know, but you had to master to get there?
Yes, you're asking me a couple of things: inspiration and role models, and it's obviously not just determination. You can be very determined and you can be terrible at something and you won't get through. I guess, if I'm being honest, part of my sort of real drive was my father died when we were quite young. So when I talk about my parents, my mother was widowed at the age of 39 with 4 children under 15 in sort of the inner city in London. So clearly things like that shape that you don't want somebody else's father to drop dead in the street. I don't often talk about it, but that is something that drives me and motivates me. I went to a girls' school, and I think it was just an assumption that I would just do whatever I wanted to, that there would be no limits from my school, from my parents. So I think that's where that sort of confidence comes from a little bit. And then I guess role models. My ambition, I have to confess, was going to Guy's Hospital. It was probably because Guy's and King's were the only 2 hospitals I'd really heard of. We only had 3 channels on TV in the late 70s. And but you know, you are and I didn't go, I ended up going to Oxford instead. But in terms of role models, it would possibly be TV characters you saw who were doctors, who were usually male. And I remember I was Professor Sir Roy Khan is an eminent liver transplant surgeon, and I was his first woman houseman in Cambridge. And he really inspired me, because I knew that on a Saturday, if he was in town, because he was traveling all over the world, as I said, he did the first liver transplant in the UK, he would come back to Addenbrooke's Hospital on a Saturday morning and teach. And I thought, I want to be like that. I want to love what I do so much that I will spend my weekends, my evenings teaching and passing on the mantle. And another person who you may see on my sort of on the board behind me was, well, I was studying for my FRCS in 1994, which is one of the sort of exams that's a prerequisite to going into senior training. In 1993, Professor Avram Mansfield had been appointed as the first ever woman consultant surgeon who was given a professorship. So I had her cutting on the wall, and I've still got it 25, 30 years later, and my husband tried to throw it away, but I told him off, and it's still on my wall. So role models along the way. And I think the original role models were probably my mother, who had to get on with it to survive. So so lots of people along the way.
I'm sorry to hear of the adversity, but there is often, it's out of adversity that we gain our biggest strengths, and we grow through that pain. And I'm glad to see where you are. And what is it? What does a day look like in Farah's shoes? What is a day in Farah Bhatti's life like as a surgeon?
Okay, the main thing is not every day is operating. Like today, we've had a clinical governance meeting where we look at safety and issues, and I'm speaking to you today in clinic later on. But on an operating day, I think the main thing is that whatever's going on outside of, whether it's at work or at home or the weather, you have to be focused. And so an operating day is very, it's a little bit, I can't claim to be an elite sportsman or even like one, because that would clearly be a terrible comparison, but you have your routine. So I'd get up 6:25. I have a compulsory 10-minute snooze, like I'm sure most of the population. And then I am out to have a coffee brought to me in bed, which is the way I like my coffee. And I'm out the door before 7, and I'm usually driven to work. I'm a little bit lucky. I get driven to work on an operating day. And then it's meeting your team brief, check those beds. It's a big team, a support service running cardiac surgery. You've got the surgical team, anaesthetic team, the scrub team, the people who run the heart-lung machine, and many other people. And then 7:45, team brief, and then send for the first patient. Usually 2 operations a day. And my day would tend to finish at 7 or 8, sometimes 5 or 6. Your role doesn't end there, because we have very sick patients potentially starting off very poorly, and they then go into intensive care. And so that's a typical operating day. And
how do you cope when people don't make it through, and where there is, unfortunately, people lose their lives? How do you manage that?
It is hard, and you have to. I remember when I was a houseman, the first time that I had to accompany a senior colleague to tell somebody had just died in A&E, passed away. It's really hard. I don't think we're particularly trained to deal with that, but it comes with a job. Luckily, cardiac surgery is a very safe procedure. All our results are online, so you can Google me. I'm very blessed to have good results, but it comes from teamwork. But it's hard, and it's and there is a lot of soul searching. Did you do everything you could? What if you had done something differently? And you do have to take stock sometimes and take time for yourself, and then you carry on. It's hard, but you do have, I think, somebody, I don't want to misquote somebody, but and I'll feel terrible for not getting it right, but they talk about in every surgeon sort of, right, there's a little graveyard, and you remember the people who you may have lost or you didn't get through, just as well as you remember the people who you did help, and families and lives you did transform.
You know, when you talk about that little graveyard, because it must be really hard. How do you cope? What do you do for self-care, and how do you get that work-life balance balanced in? Because I know about consultants that I've talked to just dealing with COVID, and I've had a consultant who's saying to me, you know, I had somebody, I held a lady's hand while she passed away. That night I couldn't drive home. I had to, you know, walk home to clear my head. And after this, Naz, I'm going to need a sabbatical, and I'm going to need counselling, because it's been so full on. And I just think, you know, how do you, as a woman who manages home, work, life balance, how do you get that? What do you do for your own self-care?
I think you need to talk to people. I think you need to do the basics, and I advocate good work-life balance. I'm not sure that I've managed to achieve it, but I do think that, and certainly with cardiac surgery, it's very much, although you have colleagues who cover your patients when you're not on call, there's this very much this sort of, you have an intimate relationship with that patient. You have touched their heart, you have done things to them, and you feel that responsibility. So you can be very consumed, and often we sort of joke that the only time you get some real downtime is when you're actually out of the country on holiday, and then you're still attached to your phone. So I think we do need to be able to trust our colleagues to you know, care for our patients just like we would for them. And I don't know, the usual stuff. I'm not practicing what I preach, but, you know, get lots of sleep, try and do some exercise. My husband will laugh if he watches this because he's very fit and I'm not. And talk to your friends, talking helps, and just take time out, use that weekend, don't sort of rush around doing lots of things, maybe have a lie-in. I mean, that's sort of really the highlight of my week sometimes, when I get to have a lie-in, and then you inevitably wake up at 6:30 anyway.
So I've yet to meet women who are, you know, who get that work-life balance the textbook way that we're supposed to, with children and managing and juggling. But there's a lovely question from Iram who's asking, you know, surgery is a male-dominated space. You come across as humble and grounded. How do you fit it in with your surgical colleagues? Do they have preconceived ideas about you?
Very insightful question, thank you. I'll give you a little bit of background first of all. When I started on this sort of journey, as they say, in 1991, only 3% of the consultant workforce, surgical workforce, were women, and that's when the year that shortly afterwards Professor Avril Mansfield was made a chair. Now, 30 years later, I went to the first Women in Surgery meeting at the Royal College of Surgeons of England. Now, 30 years later, I'm now chair of that network, and we're at the heady heights of 13%, you know, so you could say, wow, 13% of our surgeons are women. I think, great, 400% increase. And or you can say, really, is that the best we can do? What is going on? And the Women in Surgery, which I'll give a plug for, it's free to join. We have over 6,000 members, and we do stuff that you've actually already alluded to, provide people with role models, challenge the stereotypes, try to educate people about what's going on and people's lived experiences, and try to sort of get rid of some of these barriers. For example, it's not rocket science. A lot of your training years coincide with a time that people will want to have families, if you choose to. So we've got to think about sort of parenthood and how to maybe split those. That's societal issues in terms of splitting parental responsibility. But, you know, we have less than full-time training available. We have ways and means. So very much a lot of what I do and my colleagues do in Women in Surgery is to sort of tell people you can do it, give them practical advice, show them that it has been done before, challenge negative stereotypes. And when we see people who are experiencing difficulties, actually support them and try and say, actually, no, speak to this person, and call things out. So, so I'm really excited. And I think also part of that, might be veering off the sort of question, is it's really important to reach out to people a little bit like the widening participation sort of agenda. I love spending time sort of talking to sort of school children, etc., about yes, you can do it. So
nicely onto it. There's two questions I have. One is about, so you talked about parenthood. Did you face the same pressures of getting married, having children? You know, so here you are, you're a surgeon, you've broken that concrete ceiling. What was it like for you?
And as you've asked the sort of the killer question, so of course my mum was very, very protective of us, wanted all of us to get married, settle down, have children. I do remember, but my thing was, you know, when I trained, it wasn't so easy to combine both, and I didn't want anybody. It's a little bit like if you do a thesis, if you don't write up and your colleague doesn't write up, they may advance if they happen to be a man, but it would be used against you. So I didn't want anything potentially to be used against me, and times have changed, so I don't want that to go out as a message now. But yeah, my mother, I do remember every so often I should say, darling, what about this person? And I say, oh, mummy, I've got another exam in a year, so I need to study. And then one year, about sort of 10 years, and she goes, you seem to do an awful lot of exams, don't you? So she was getting a little fed up. But in the end, I did marry just before, towards the senior end of my training, and we seem to sort of be living happily ever after. But yeah, of course there were pressures, and sadly we weren't blessed with children, but had a spot of IVF, which again I don't often share, but I am here with you, and didn't work out. So yeah, but yeah, of course all mums want to see their children happy and fulfilled, and I'm very fulfilled.
Here, but there is this other thing that you touched on in the question before this, which was about you love going out and teaching others, encouraging others. So if you had, what pearls of wisdom would you want to share with people who are not just on this call? This recording is going to go out on YouTube, on the Muslim Women's Network UK website. But for the budding surgeons, for the budding academics, what would you encourage them to do? What do they need to be doing?
Okay, well, you have one life and you want to make the most of it, and you want to do something that you enjoy. So explore all avenues. If we're talking specifically about being a doctor, there's so many different specialties you could go into. So try to read up about them, get some information about them. You have to be determined, you have to be focused in whatever you do, and that again in any walk of life. And just so to nip things in the bud, we try and bust these myths. There's no, you can't be a surgeon and get pregnant. Yes, you can. There's no, you can't be a surgeon and have a family. Of course you can. So yes, you can. If you've had the baby, you really ought to try and look after it, or him or her. You can't be a surgeon and have a work-life balance. Yes, you can. There's been often things about hijab, comes in. There is that. I've had trainees with or junior doctors with a hijab. There is no reason. It's just like wearing any other hat in theatre. As long as it's clean, you can. Of course, you can wear a hijab in theatre. So, and I do a lot of work with the Kuwaiti and the Gulf women surgeons groups. They all wear hijabs. So all of these things. Often many people have trained 30 years ago, and they might have a different idea of what's acceptable now, but there is no barrier to you doing whatever you want. You do have to actually gain some skills and get your opportunities. So there is no limit. You have to believe in what you want to do. And certainly when the Muslim women's group, there is absolutely no reason why you can't achieve whatever you want to, whichever field you wish to go to.
That is so inspiring to listen to. So what next for Farah Bhatti? What next? You've done all of this. What are your plans?
I don't know. I'm sort of I've been a consultant now for 13 coming up to 14 years, so that's obviously the day job, the really important thing. As you probably know from the bio, I try to give something back. It's great being the first Muslim woman on college council. I only realized that because a chap said to me, I'm the only ever Muslim they've had, and I thought, oh, then that must make me the first Muslim woman. I don't want to, it's fine to be the first just because I happen to be there. I do not want to be the last. Okay, I can't stand the idea of people sort of doing it and look at me and pulling up the ladder. No, I want to send the lift back down to, and not forget where I sort of began. In terms of, who knows what's next. I'm a council member, so there's all sorts of ways you can come up in the leadership at the Royal College of Surgeons. Who knows? But more of the same, I think.
You said you were putting the ladder back down. What does that look like tangibly? What are you doing actively what does it look like to make sure that we are bringing them behind us?
For example, things, and there's something I think that's referred to as survivorship bias, where I made it, look at me, I did it this way, so why shouldn't you? And almost making it tougher for the people who are following you. We only made it because other people made it, made the path for us. So I'm very much things like with women in surgery, most of my colleagues, and I will spend most weekends talking to medical school, you know, doing sort of medical student events. Lucky it's a lot of virtual stuff now, so there's not too much traveling involved. Being available for people, being at the end of the phone, you know, DMing somebody if something happens. So, and then giving them practical advice. I really believe it's great. You need that inspiration and the role modeling, etc. But also you need to give practical advice when things aren't going right. Say, actually, no, if you do this, this and this, how about that? So those are kind of things. We always talk about how in leadership positions, you can talk about gender, you could talk about sort of ethnicity, about ages ago there was this NHS report about the snowy white peaks, that on the sort of the top sort of boards, etc., there's not real diversity of faces, shall we say. And little things like, not little things like, the Royal College says we have an emerging leaders program, which was funded by Lady Estelle Wolfson kindly, and that's to try and get people who may have been focused on the job, because surgery is quite an important job. You've got to sort of establish yourself with your team and get good patient care. That's the priority. But then people, namely people, sort of dip their toe into leadership, sort of see how the college works, see what positions might be available to them. If they're and networking, I think that's what sometimes we miss out on. So lots of practical things in terms of how we can help the next generation. And our 30th anniversary, I think on I'm looking at my calendar, on the 10th of September, I think we celebrate 30 years of women in surgery, and there will be a big conference hopefully in our new building in Lincoln's Inn Fields. So lots of practical things, lots of inspirational things, and busting those myths, those tired old stereotyped myths.
No, you mean us women knowing our place and staying where we
in our lane and not chasing any. I won't go there.
So thank you for that. I'm a former NHS commissioner in my previous life, and I was part of the alumni for Future Leaders and the Breaking Through program. So, and I still do leadership development training at the NHS Leadership Academy. So I feel that I owe a lot to the NHS as my from my leadership journey, certainly. But one of the things that was what I found interesting is, you know, from a leadership perspective, it's about being your true authentic self. And for me, as a Muslim woman, my Iman, my Deen has really strengthened my resolve and gives me strength in how I deal with things. Has your religion or your ethnicity influenced? I mean, but of course it does influence because it's who you are. But has it influenced your the way you work or how you do things differently? And are you able to be that authentic self? Because from what I'm hearing, the humility with which you speak with does, you know, that congruence is there. But have you always been allowed to be your authentic self?
I think I have. I think Caroline started with saying, "Oh, I'm the one who speaks up and challenges and difficult." And I thought, no, don't say difficult. And then I was thinking, yeah, I'm probably that person. And in terms of religion, I think religion and upbringing and those values that you're brought up with, they shape you, don't they? Events shape you, like my father's death, or whether I happen to get into one university or another. But the values you're brought up with, and I was brought up in a very conservative household. My mum wears a hijab, my sister, my two nieces wear the hijab. They're all in London. And I remember when I did A levels, I fasted through Ramadan. That was just normal, and it was in summer, so it was quite hard. And so I still pray. Am I really religious now? No. Do I always say Bismillah in my kalma before I go to bed, or Bismillah when I start something important? Yes, and I've taught my husband some key things as well. So, and I think somewhere I'm looking for it in my office, I've got a Bible and a Quran in my office. So, so yeah, some things are part of you, whether you always display them outwardly or not. But I'm me. I'm the same. Sadly, I don't look the same as I did 30 years ago, but that's life, hey. But I'm still the same person.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's many of us that look the same what we did 30 years ago. But what would the 30 years ago, what would you tell that old self? The question from Fozia is, what would you tell the old, the younger you now? What words of wisdom would you part with?
You're going to be okay. Because there are times when you didn't, when your world falls apart when you're a child and you lose, your father, that it's pretty traumatic. So I don't think that little, once we were over that sort of particular sort of event, not that you ever get over it, I don't think I needed any help with inspiration or determination because I was always going to do it. What I'd probably say is be kind. I wish I'd been a bit kinder to myself. It's, you don't have to be perfect. Things will go wrong. Don't beat yourself up about it. Try to be a bit kinder to be as kind to yourself as you might be with your best mate when you're giving him or her advice. That's probably what I would have said to the younger self. And you're going to be okay.
Yeah, we do that really well, don't we, as women? Beat ourselves up and be our worst critics. So Ashra's asking us, Ashra's asking, as a Muslim woman in surgery, have you experienced discrimination and how did you deal with this?
I think, as I alluded to, not overtly, not particularly. It's more the subtle things which I've mentioned, maybe not always having that job or being told the job was coming up and it's actually was advertised and nobody really told you, though. It's those little things. But no, during my training I don't think so. I think maybe as you come to the senior end of but that's not to say things don't happen, and I absolutely know and I'm aware things do happen, which is why it's so important to call it out. So, but I think when I was growing up in the 70s in London, I would have probably thought, perhaps thinking back, that maybe my colour, my ethnicity would have impacted rather than being a girl, because I just thought, that's but looking back, probably my gender has probably posed a few more barriers than if I were a man. So, but nothing that was insurmountable. I used to talk about, when we talked about glass ceilings, I used to talk about, oh, it's more like a mezzanine level. You hit your head a few times and you go around it. Although now with a concrete ceiling, I was looking up, Googling how to smash concrete, and apparently you can. You can smash concrete. It might get a bit of a headache, but there are power tools that will do that.
There are lots of tools. And talking of tools, do you have any hobbies? Do you have any things that help you switch off?
Pre-COVID times, I love traveling and exploring different cultures and sort of going on expeditions. That was sort of my fun, my sort of enjoyment, really. So, and no doubt that will come back. So I do like, I used to like walking when I did some of my training in Manchester. We'd be up in the lakes every weekend. And now, again, I'm really lucky that I've ended up in the Gower, and so it's a stunning sort of part of the world. So yeah, going for walks and exploring different cultures, and I quite like my food as well, so a bit of a foodie.
So which is your favourite country that you visited?
Now, you see, Naz, you're putting me on the spot. I didn't really want to be so tricky. There's some, I still remember going, I mean, we all, went to Machu Picchu, but I still remember Cusco, going up and that amazing square in the middle of nowhere. But I think my real love is for Southeast Asian sort of countries. I sort of really like, I feel quite comfortable there. So, not done, been to Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, that kind of thing. And quite like South America and Central America. My husband lived out there for a year many years ago. So, yeah.
And what was it like getting your OBE?
I think overwhelming. I was elated. I was actually on a Zoom call, and I looked, which I'm not doing now, but I looked at my mobile and an email came in, and so I sort of told my husband, "You're not supposed to tell anybody." I couldn't believe it. I was absolutely overwhelmed, overawed. Couldn't believe that I would do. Often, when you're nominated for things, about things, and so it was completely out of the blue. After a very hard year, and everyone's had a hard year, it was really, really lovely to be thought that you'd be in the same sort of, you know, the people thought so much of me. So it was, yeah, I was elated.
I was going to say, how did you feel? What does it mean to you to have that OBE? What does it mean to you?
For me, it means that somebody has valued what I do or recognized it as that. I don't think, if I didn't get it, I wouldn't think that anything I did was less valuable, but to have that sort of recognition, not monetary, not sort of, but to, yeah, just to be valued and to be recognized, and that what you're doing means something to people. And yeah, I can't sort of phrase it better than that. Really, it's really humbling, and I'm so lucky to have been sort of put up for it and be offered it.
May you continue to be blessed with more awards and recognition. I certainly have really, I'm sure I speak for everybody on this call. We have really enjoyed having you on. And I have one final question before I let you go. So I just want to say once again, before I ask you a question, thank you so much for your time. It's humbling for me, certainly, you know, to meet women that I feel inspired by, and I'm sure I speak for everybody else. There's been lots of chat in the group who people are saying, you know, the questions that they've asked and how you've answered them. You know, those golden nuggets, those light bulbs, you know, we inspire each other and we get strength from each other. So from certainly on behalf of everybody, thank you. But before I let you go, I am going to ask you one final question. How do you, Farah, choose to challenge?
Well, I think, as I've been challenging all my life, not challenging as in challenging to other people, but I have challenged things all my life. And I choose to challenge, and I choose to call out bad behavior, because that's very difficult. It's almost slightly easier being an ally than actually calling out when it happens to you, and things do still happen to me. So I choose to challenge bad behavior, and I choose to call it out.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to Faiza now, and it's been an absolute pleasure having this conversation with you. I've really enjoyed it, and hope to see more of you. And once COVID is over, maybe we'll do something like this in person with all of us.
Thank you so much, Naz. Thank you.